Right now, along the North Carolina coast, something is systematically silencing our Coast Guard's frequencies. We've cross-referenced official transmission logs with localized dead zones to reveal a chilling pattern that the government isn't talking about. Is this a massive of security breach, or are we caught in the middle of unacknowledged military testing the ghost signals of North Carolina, investigating coastal interference? This report is not based on vague suspicion. It is based on a dated pattern. On March 9, 2026, the U.S. Coast Guard Navigation Center logged an incident classified as unknown interference. NAVCEN stated that it found no known GPS constellation anomaly, no authorized GPS tests in the area, and that space weather was unlikely to explain the event. In the surrounding period, Coast Guard broadcast notices warned mariners of hazardous firing exercises in the Cherry Point operating area, warning area W122, during the weeks of February 16 through 21, 2026, and March 2nd through 8, 2026. At the same time, local notice to mariners entries documented APTIM geotechnical survey operations offshore of Cape Fear from January 27, 2026 through the end of March 2026, using the RV James K. Goodwin digital avatar of Farrah Ferris. And this was not occurring in a clean signal environment. On May 1st, 2025, the Coast Guard said that at least 7 hoax distress calls had already been transmitted over VHF Channel 16 since December 21st, 2024, believed to originate from the Leland and Brunswick areas of North Carolina. Those are the facts. The question is not whether every anomaly proves covert activity. The question is whether a coastal zone that should be operationally reliable is showing a pattern of interference, navigation, instability, and distress channel contamination serious enough to demand forensic scrutiny. Channel 16 is the core maritime distress and calling frequency. Coast Guard VHF distress coverage along the East Coast is supposed to protect the vast majority of waters within 20 nautical miles of shore. That means repeated anomalies in this zone are not trivial. They affect navigation confidence, emergency communications, and maritime security. The current public record supports a real anomaly pattern. It does not yet publicly prove systematic silencing of Coast Guard frequencies, but it absolutely justifies a disciplined investigation into whether the North Carolina coast is experiencing infrastructure stress, overlapping operational interference, navigation signal disruption, or a deeper resilience problem inside a critical maritime communications environment. Source support for the paragraph above: Analytical Glossary, Seneca Guns, the long-used name for unexplained boom sounds reported near large bodies of water. USGS says some earthquake booms are later traced to human causes, such as sonic booms, explosions, or construction, while others remain unresolved. WECT describes Seneca guns as a relatively common phenomenon in southeastern North Carolina. VHF Channel 16, the Marine Distress, Safety, and Calling Channel. NAVCEN states that any vessel equipped with a VHF marine radio telephone must generally maintain a watch on Channel 16 whenever the radio is not being used to communicate. Rescue 21, the Coast Guard's Coastal Distress Communications System. NAVCEN says Sea Area A1 means more than 90% of the waters within 20 nautical miles of the U.S. coast are within Coast Guard VHF distress alert coverage, with response typically on Channel 16. BNM, or Broadcast Notice to Mariners, a Coast Guard maritime safety broadcast used to warn mariners about changes or hazards affecting navigation, typically over VHF FM voice in the local sector. LNM, or Local Notice to Mariners, the Coast Guard's weekly primary publication for disseminating information on aids to navigation, hazards to navigation, and other marine safety items needed to keep charts and publications current. CPOA, or Cherry Point Operating Area, the offshore operating area repeatedly named in Coast Guard March 2026 hazard notices for North Carolina waters. In those notices, mariners were warned about firing exercises hazardous to surface vessels. W-122, an FAA-designated warning area, identified as W-122 Cherry Point, NC. In this paper, it is the relevant offshore military use airspace warning area designation tied to the Cherry Point operating environment. Live fire training, official training that includes real weapons fire. In a February 11, 2026 local report citing MCAS Cherry Point's notice, special boat teams were scheduled to conduct surface direct live fire training in BT-9 and BT-11 from February 15th through February 28, while explosive ordnance disposal Marines could also conduct explosives training. Noise advisory, a formal military notice warning nearby communities about expected noise, vibration, low-flying aircraft, or other training effects. Camp Lejeune says it issues a weekly noise report every Friday and provides a hotline for concerns. Hoax distress call, a false emergency transmission over marine radio. On May 1st, 2025, the Coast Guard said at least 7 hoax calls had been sent over VHF Channel 16 since December 21st, 2024, and were believed to originate from the Leland and Brunswick areas. Geotechnical survey, offshore sampling and survey work used to characterize seafloor or subsurface conditions. Coast Guard local notice to mariners' entries for March 2026 say APTIM was conducting geotechnical samples and surveys in the vicinity of Cape Fear from January 27th through the end of March 2026 aboard the RV James K. Goodwin. Operational overlap, when multiple legitimate activities occupy the same maritime environment at the same time. In your Cape Fear paper, that means at minimum offshore hazard notices, survey operations, routine boating and shipping, and background coastal military training noise. GNSS interference, FAA's umbrella term for disruptions affecting satellite-based positioning, navigation, and timing. The FAA distinguishes jamming, which degrades or denies reception, from spoofing, which causes a receiver to calculate false position, navigation, or timing information. Signal integrity, the practical reliability and trustworthiness of navigation and communication systems in real operating conditions. In this report, it refers to whether the Cape Fear maritime environment is stable enough for dependable distress monitoring, vessel coordination, and position confidence. The operational importance of that reliability is reflected in the Coast Guard's watchkeeping rules and Rescue 21 coverage standard. Reference Block U.S. Coast Guard Navigation Center, Guide Tool, entry showing unknown interference on March 9, 2026, and stating no known GPS anomalies, no authorized tests, and space weather unlikely. U.S. Coast Guard NAVCEN, broadcast notice to mariners, Cherry Point Operating Area, CPOA, hazardous firing notices for February 16 to 21, 2026, and March 2, 8, 2026, including W-122 grids for Sector North Carolina. FAA, Chapter 24. Warning areas, identifying W-122, Cherry Point, NC. U.S. Coast Guard NAVCEN, local notice to mariners dated March 4, 2026 and March 10, 2026, documenting APTIM offshore survey operations near Cape Fear through the end of March 2026 aboard RV James K. Goodwin. U.S. Coast Guard News, May 1, 2025, reporting at least 7 hoax distress calls over VHF Channel 16 originating from the Leland, Brunswick area since December 21, 2024. U.S. Coast Guard NAVCEN, radio watch-keeping regulations in GMDSS areas, confirming Channel 16 watch requirements, and the Coast Guard Sea Area A1 VHF distress coverage standard. No AA SWPC R1 event. Early on 16 March 2026, stating minor HF degradation over the Atlantic. FAA GNSS interference guidance, distinguishing jamming and spoofing.